This is Dr.T Varalakshmi discussing you about the question banks related to this Unit 2 of Business Economics and Financial Analysis, that is production and cost analysis. The short term, long term, and the critical thinking questions in this particular unit is going to be based on the concepts like production function, isoquants, isocosts, marginal rate of technical substitutes, least cost combination of the inputs, and the productional functions types like a Cobb-Douglas productional function, external and internal economies of scale, types of the cost type, cost analysis, and the break-even analysis, as well as the determinants of the break-even analysis and the managerial significance of the cost analysis, and simple problems related to the break-even analysis. The short-term questions mostly based on the basic terminology related to the production function, and cost analysis. So the first question, if you see, examine the meaning of margin of safety. So the margin of safety means above the break-even level point in any productional level is called as the margin of safety. So we need to provide the graphical representation and a formula for this one, margin of safety. And before going to have this margin of safety definition, we need to have the knowledge on the break-even point analysis also. That we need to explain that one. And second thing is explain the meaning of opportunity cost. So cost is the expenditure incurring on any product is called as the cost. If that cost is based on the next best alternative of any options which they have taken into consideration, that cost is called as the opportunity cost. And we need to explain about that opportunity cost with some examples. And the third question, write the differences between the explicit cost and implicit cost. So the costs which are directly associated for the production of the product is called as the implicit cost, and the additional cost which is added to the product is called as the explicit cost. And we need to show the difference between the explicit and implicit costs. And define profit and volume ratio. So here the cost analysis we have to explain. So generally the revenue of the particular product is based on its expenditure and the profit levels. And the profit levels of the organization will be increases as per the number of volume it is increasing. That relationship between the profit and volume with an examples and a formula, we need to explain this one. Next thing is write a short note on the angle of incidence. So in the analysis of the break even, at any 2 points, if the law of the demand is going to be explaining or the calculating, and that at a given 2 points, at a given 2 points, middle of that one, if the cost is going to be analyzing and the demand for the product is going to be analyzing, then it is called as the angle of incidence. That is arc elasticity and the point elasticities both can explain under this angle of incidence. So next point is about what are the assumptions of break-even analysis. So which means break-even analysis shows that the rate at which a particular producer has to produce, where he will get their no loss, no gain point. So that no loss, no gain point explanation with a graphical representation and with real-time illustrations we need to show under the break-even analysis with some neat formulas. And write a short note on productional function. The process of converting the inputs to the outputs is called as the productional function. That neat procedure of the productional function and the mathematical expressions between the inputs to the expected outputs we need to show under the productional function. Next thing is summarize the meaning of margin of safety ratio. So here the break-even point and margin of safety and the ratio of the actual sales to the break-even sales we need to explain, and 1 minus P by V ratio and its relations to the margin of safeties we need to explain that one. And next thing is list out the assumptions of this break-even analysis. So under which circumstances the break-even analysis will be exist, and what are the assumptions of that one, we need to explain that one, and outline the exceptions of law of diminishing marginal utility. So which means if the keep on a product is going to be using, and that's taste and preferences of the people will be satisfied, then they'll look out for the new product, so that the marginal cost of that particular product, existing products, will be keep on reduces up to certain time period. That thing we need to explain under the law of diminishing marginal utilities. And list out the internal economies of scale, that is productional, what are the internal beneficiary elements, and list out the external economies of scale in the productional elements we need to explain, and illustrate the formula for contribution, so that is sales minus variable cost of the product. We need to explain what is this sales and how it is going to be becoming a revenue, and what is the meaning of the variable cost, and what is that importance of the contribution. These 3 points we need to explain about that one, and explain the formula for margin of safety. So which means, so margin of safety means actual sales minus break-even sales. So here we need to explain about break-even sales and actual revenue and its formula and its relations to the margin of safety we need to explain. And write about the formula for P by V ratio, profit volume ratio. So not only this P by V ratio, various kinds of the P by V ratios for the given values we need to explain with some of the examples. And recall the formula for break-even point in terms of the value. So in terms of the value, how to calculate, that is fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. And again we need to explain what is contribution and the fixed cost, and write the formula for break-even point in terms of the units. That is number of units if we want to calculate how to do this break-even point, and the features of the productional function and its characteristics we need to explain, and difference between the direct and indirect cost, and marginal use of the productional functions. So like this kind of the short term questions there is a chance of asking, and the long term questions will be like distinguish the different types of the productional functions with their formulas. Various four kinds of the productional functions are all there, we need to explain about that one, and define cost and how are costs classified. Explain any 5 important cost concepts useful for managerial definition. So there are nearly 14 to 15 types of the costs are all there. We need to explain what is the cost and the types of such costs and its importance for the management decisions we need to explain, and explain various economies of scale and diseconomies of scale that accumulates to the firm when it expands its operations. So both internal and external factors and economies and diseconomies of scales we need to explain for the productional functions, and simplify the concepts and assumptions of break-even analysis with the help of this diagram. So we need to explain the break-even analysis, contribution, fixed cost, variable cost, and the relationship between this sales revenue and the sales output. With a diagram, we need to explain the margin of safety levels and loss areas and the meeting point of this revenue to the cost. Everything we need to explain under the break-even analysis diagram, and explain the concept of the productional function and why is it useful in the analysis of firm's behavior. So what is the meaning of the productional function and firm's behavior towards the productional functions, and the concept of that one, that is single variable, multiple variable, double variable, that variables, different kinds of the productional functions we need to explain under this one, and illustrate the break-even chart with the diagram, and also write in what way it is useful to know the profit and loss of the company. Here, along with the break-even chart and its relations to the P by V ratio of the organization, we need to explain. And a firm starts its business with a fixed expenditure of 60,000 to produce the commodity X, and its variable cost is 2 rupees per unit. Prevailing market price of the product is 6 rupees. How much the firm should produce to earn a profit of 20,000 at a price. So if we see this one, contribution of this particular product is selling price minus variable cost, that is 4 rupees is the contribution. Then break even point is 60 thousands of the fixed cost divided by 4. That is 15,000 is the contribution. So if they are expecting that 20,000, then 60,000 plus 20,000 divided by 4 means 80,000 divided by 4. That means if the organization is able to sell 15,000 number of the units, there is a no loss no gain point. 20,000 number of units, there is a chance of getting 20,000 rupees of profits. All these are all with a neat given data and as well as the formulas. We need to explain that one. And a manufacturer has a sale of 15,000 at a profit of 400. If he sells 19,000, he makes a profit of 12,000. Find out contribution margin ratio, BEP sales for a profit of 4,400. So here we need to calculate this BEP and contribution margin ratio by using the P by V ratio. So sales divided by profit levels, we will get the P by V ratio. So based on that 1 divided by P by V ratio will give 1 minus P by V ratio will get the contribution margin ratio, and BEP sale for a profit of 4,400. So for this one, fixed cost fixed cost divided by P by V ratio, if it is done, we can calculate the BEP sales. Next thing is examine the significance of the break-even analysis and state the assumptions and limitations of the break-even analysis. So here we need to explain the applicability of the break-even analysis at various situations of the management decisions and its limitations and assumptions. Next thing is what is meant by the cost and explain in detail about the concepts and nature of the cost. So various types of the cost and its natures we need to explain under this question. Next level of these long-term answers might be related to the defining Cobb-Douglas productional function and productional functions with one variable inputs, and define economies of scale and explain different types of external economies as well as the internal economies of scale, and defining economies of scale, explain different types of external and internal economies of scale, and outline the significance of the break-even analysis and state the assumptions and limitations of the break-even analysis and assumptions of break-even analysis and its used for the management in the day-to-day operations, as well as the questions like sales information, selling price, variable cost, fixed cost informations they will provide, and they may ask you to calculate the break-even point in terms of the units and the sales revenue. These simple problems related to the BEP, and defining and explaining isoquants and what are the properties of the isoquants, explaining about the producer's equilibrium with the help of the isoquants. So all these are possible questions under the long-term questions, and most of the cost concepts are overlapping and repetitive. Do you agree with this statement? So which means what is a cost and various types of the cost and overlapping costs, that informations we need to explain. And again the simple problems related to the break-even point, like providing the information of sales, your selling price, variable cost, etc. Based on that one, we need to calculate the BEP and explain how cost output relationship helps the entrepreneurs to expand their decisions. And once if we see this critical thinking questions, which of the following statements best describes the general form of a productional function and why it is a pure technological relationships between the quantities of inputs and quantities of outputs? It represents the technology of an organization, sectors of an economy, prices of inputs or of the outputs do not enter into the productional function. It is a flow concept describing the transformation of inputs into the output per unit of the time. So at various situations, we need to explain about the productional functions. So that is 4 types of the productional functions we need to explain, Macmillan's, etc. and distinguish between short-run production function and the long-run production function, and the law of diminishing returns, to sometimes known as the law of variable proportionates, and how this phenomena exists we need to explain with figures and examples, and explain the theoretical principles of the production, to explain the relative substitutes of one inputs for another occurrence as a result of the increased price of the labor, and examine the importance of the law of the diminishing returns. What do you think it is to be causes and effects of the management decisions, and technical and managerial indivisibilities causes increasing returns to scale, giving opinion, and list out the differences between the increasing, decreasing, and constant returns to scale with help of suitable figures. And with the increase in outputs of the firm, their average total cost and average variable cost curves come closer and closer to each other, but never meet. So that is the ISO coins and ISO cost informations that we need to provide, and marginal rate of technical substitutes and the least cost combination of the inputs levels. All these are all we need to explain. So these are all the scope for the concepts to ask about the short term, long term, and critical thinking questions from this unit 2. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.